My Africa Book Report, Chapter 1, Growing Up Star Wars. In their hearts humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. Proverbs 16:9. It was the fall of 1977 when I would start the first of many trials in life. Mrs. Weaver was a large woman who wore uncomfortable-looking dresses that did nothing to help her uncomfortable, angry demeanor. She had short, dark hair and always looked greasy and sweaty. She had skin the color of uncooked meatloaf with dark-rimmed glasses. Miss Weaver was not in a good mood most of the time. "I said, clear your desks," she screamed as she pushed my books off the desk and onto the floor. Guess I didn't hear her. I don't remember if it was for a pop quiz or a test, or even the subject. I just remember the frustrated fat lady yelling. That fall, our fourth grade teacher would give us the task of writing a 100-page book report on Africa. Never mind that we could barely write a proper sentence. We were going to write a small novel by the end of the year. This would also be the first year I experienced an obsession. The obsession would be of the pop culture variety. I would share this all-encompassing phenomena with millions around the world. The distraction from my report would be called Star Wars. Like most kids of the 70s, my brother Mike and I grew up watching TV and enjoying the occasional trip to the movie theater. We were Saturday morning cartoon junkies as well as Sunday night Disney fans. A lot of pop culture would change during this time in our childhood. Very adult themes and incredible realism in movies and television. We had standard television growing up, no cable. This meant limited channels, but compared to now, somehow worked better, only on a different level. Much of the time, prime time, it was the parents' choice due to not only the channel limitations, but also the lack of working televisions. Me and Mike had a 1960s era black and white Sylvania. The tuner would even get less stations than our floor model in the living room, and would go on the blink occasionally, leaving you with just static. At the end of the 70s, we would realize the video game craze that would go full throttle in the 80s. To own an Atari meant that you and your family had some money to throw and made you one of those people important enough to have as a friend. We eventually had one around 1980. Spending most time outdoors was a normal existence for kids in the 70s. Summer and winter activities would almost produce themselves out of necessity. When you didn't have a game, you would invent one. Games like Frisbee Freeze Tag, Sled Ride Crash Up Derby, and bicycle riding competitions. Our social skills and communication skills didn't involve technology. Passing notes in class, Pony Express trips across the neighborhood on bikes to meet at the convenience store, meeting up with friends and things like that. Rubber meets the road. Creativity was important to you. Everything was not prescribed fun. Life as a kid then was more of an exploration of possibilities based on experimentation. Seeing some movie advertisements for the George Lucas movie had sent my 9-year-old brain into overload. Then there was the trip to Montgomery Ward Department Store in nearby Boardman, Ohio, where I remember seeing the entire rack of Star Wars novels. The shiny gold-bordered book with the movie poster showcasing the main characters of Luke, Leia, R2-D2, and C-3PO in the foreground, with a silhouette of the Death Star in the background, and of course the menacing-looking robot thing that would later turn out to be half dude, half robot. Music turned out to be a major part of the 70s also, to an extent that I would not realize till much later. Looking at movie photos in the middle of the book in the store that day is inseparable from the song that was playing, "I'm in you, you're in me. I'm in you, you're in me. But you gave me the love that I never had." All the while I was staring at a blue-eyed dog ape beast wearing a headset flying a spaceship. I was so hooked on what this was all about, it looked so real in those pics. All I had to look forward to was going through my dad's old issues of National Geographic and getting library books about Africa for the next year, while trying not to think about that space movie. My dream of seeing the distraction of Star Wars wouldn't be realized till summer of '78. The D+ I received for the pile of mostly crude drawings and scant information gleaned from my dad's pile of geographics was rewarded with a trip to Illinois to visit my dad's mom at her family farm, an annual trip the family made during summer vacation. Galesburg, Illinois, like the rest of the state, was a town surrounded by cornfields. Chicago simply had the addition of a lake. The drive was 12 hours. We drove all of Ohio east to west, with East Liverpool, our town, on the Pennsylvania border. Then the state of Indiana, again, nothing but farms and as flat as the earth was once thought to be. Finally, the land of Lincoln itself. Mom, Dad, Mike, and Sister Angel and I crammed into our Chevy Citation headed for Illinois. This was my favorite place growing up. 12 hours later, we left the interstate. A truck stop marked the exit to a long series of dirt roads leading to Grandma's house. A farm consisting of a large 2-story farmhouse and a 2.5 barns, the half being the chicken coop. This property is surrounded by endless cornfields that had a big yard where we would play baseball with cousins that came over. Baseball seemed to dominate this part of the country, whereas football is number one where I come from. Uncle Roy was only a year older than me. There must have been some weird competition with grandparents on both sides to have kids close to their own grandchildren's age. On my mother's side, I have an Aunt Judy that's the same age as Roy, and her brothers Randy and Steve are only a couple years older than her. It was strange having uncles and an aunt so close to my age, but in the case of Roy, it really worked out. Roy was like having a second brother to Mike. We all had fun together, and the Star Wars thing was mutual to all the kids and adults at the time. You had to join the newfound cult of Star Wars, and our indoctrination would be that summer of 1978 at the DriveIn theater. My first memories of a drive-in were Skyview Cinema, just a short trip from Lake Croft in Calcutta, Ohio. Skyview was next to Hill's department store, the area's only retailer until Kmart moved in during the 80s. Before going to the drive-in, we always loaded up on fresh popcorn from Hill's, then headed next door to Skyview to watch the movie. As a child, I only remember seeing Walt Disney movies at Skyview like Herbie the Love Bug and Dumbo. The theater in Galesburg was no different. A concession stand, sloped parking spots with the antique 1950s-style speakers on the pole next to the car. Of course, there was the standard old-school playground directly below the screen down front, so all the kids could be watched playing before the feature. Drive-ins were a trade-off compared to the modern sit-down movie theaters of today. Kids could congregate at the playground. You weren't in any danger of interrupting anybody when you got up to go to the concession stand or bathroom, and parents could smoke anywhere. The movie-going experience was as social as it was entertaining, at least for the kids. Then at dusk it would happen. While people traveling back and forth to their cars and concessions and the playground, sound would wake up the speakers, creating a weird echo with the first movie previews. The 4-story tall pale screen would finally have soft focused images on it that would seem to get sharper with the fading light, until finally all attention was on the huge wall in front of the big terraced gravel parking lot. All the while waiting and wondering what this movie promised during the last year was going to be settled on this summer night in Illinois. After the crushing grade on that awful book report and dealing with angry Miss Weaver, this was going to heal everything. Like the pictures in the book, the look of the movie was so real compared to all the science fiction that I had been exposed to thus far. The debate each Sunday was whether Jim was going to be allowed to watch Space 1999 or whether The Muppet Show would win out with Brother Mike and the families on one television. The votes were always against me, and before Martin Landau and that Moonbase Alpha, it was reruns of Lost in Space, which me and Mike both liked, especially because of the robot. Everything in Star Wars looked real and worn. The locations in Tunisia were absolutely the opposite of the horrible studio sets that most science fiction television shows and movies were shot in. It wouldn't be until years later that I realized how miraculous it was that the movie even got made, given all the technical limitations. That summer night in Illinois was not a disappointment. The movie was so exciting as the TV spots had made it look. Even so, I wouldn't truly be able to enjoy it until I viewed it in an indoor theater, which would take place back home at the American Theater in downtown East Liverpool. I only remember seeing one movie at the American prior to Star Wars. It was about drag racing. I seen it with my parents a few years earlier. I also remember my Uncle Randy seeing the movie Jaws there a couple years earlier. The American was an old theater built in 1909. She had the standard old school marquee with neon and light bulbs, a classic ticket box out front, and giant red velour curtains inside. Eventually, the American would disappear, along with the Skyview Drive-In, and was replaced with the Skyview Indoor Theater. The new theater would feature 2 cinemas right in the heart of Calcutta Shopping Plaza, with Star Chase Video Arcade right next door. Movies, video games, and music would shape a lot of things in our world as teenagers in the 80s. All the things of the 70s that I hardly noticed as a child, I wouldn't be recognized for their importance until much later in life. Music played a big role in my life, and it still does today. Without a good soundtrack, my childhood would have been just like a movie without music. The soundtrack of my childhood included Paul McCartney and Wings, Elton John, Steely Dan, Cheap Trick, and the list goes on. The song Let 'Em In by Wings always takes me back memories of walking through the snow heading to the doors of the Christian elementary school that I attended for a short period. Someone knocking at the door, someone ringing the bell. It always seemed to be winter in these memories. The building still stands and still serves as a Christian school. I even proposed to my wife Kim there in 2014. We did have a piano that was given to us by my dad's stepmother, Evelyn. My brother and I took lessons, but there was no real discipline in us. Mike would end up playing sax in the school band, and I would end up with an electric guitar making noise with a few friends. In 1980, I was 12. This is when music went television with MTV. Then the pressure to look the part, since we see our heroes on television. We dressed like them, talked, walked, and danced like them, occasionally. My first ideas about style came from the cover of a magazine with Cheap Trick on it. 2 of the guys had long hair with suits. The drummer often wore a white long-sleeve office shirt and a tie and looked like he worked at a desk. But my favorite was guitarist Rick Nielsen, sporting a combination of 50s-looking dweeb outfits mixed with sweaters from other eras, bow ties, and hair cut from church. The next thing I know, these guys are on TV, talking and moving and influencing us all. I want my MTV. So much would have to take place between Mrs. Weaver's class in junior high, to high school, and to adulthood, and ultimately to the real Africa. I guess my statement about the 70s and 80s would be that for most of my generation, we could admit to being hopelessly devoted to what we heard on the radio, watched on television, and seen at the movies.